So behind me, Glamis Castle, and there is also a village called Glamis, and there was a palace here, or rather a hunting lodge.
Do you want to spell Glamis, Mike? Because there's Joe here as well. Spell Glamis, because a lot of people pronounce it wrongly.
Yeah, Glamis, Glamis, and it was a childhood home of the Queen Mother. Of course, she passed away several years ago, but she used to come here and visit her relations here today. In fact, the present family who are here today are second cousins of the Queen. And it's the most magnificent, picturesque castle. Talking about its origins, these origins go back to about the 11th century. In fact, in 1034, King Malcolm II of Scotland, he was in the area inhabiting this hunting lodge as it was then. So it's a very, very ancient place. And he died. He was assassinated, unfortunately. Now, in the 14th century, there was this chap called Sir John Lyon. And it happened to be that King Robert II, who owned the lands and the estates around here as well as the hunting lodge palace, decided to reward Sir John Lyon and gave him the lands of Glamis, and the Lyon family have inhabited this place right up until this day. In fact, Sir John Lyon did a very good thing. He actually married the daughter of King Robert II, and she was Princess Joanna. So it had that royal connection going back many, many years. Now, there are various additions, there are various dates in terms of the core of this Glamis Castle, and very ancient bits of it which actually go back to the 11th century. But other bits, the present layout of the castle, you probably can date most of that going back to the 15th century, but there was additional improvements made to it in the 18th century, and the workers, the people who worked on the estate, used to live around here, and when they were enlarging and altering the castle, they actually had to move out. So at that point in the 18th century, they created the village of Glamis and the beautiful St Fergus Kirk, and there was a Christian settlement there going way back to the 7th century, so huge religious importance also, and St Fergus Well. And the grandfather of the present Earl of Strathmore happened to be called Fergus, so they kept that name in the family too. When you go around it, and it's open to the public, they give you personal guided tours, and you can appreciate the history of the family right up to the present day, and it is a residence. They actually live here. It's not just a museum, and they do use some of the state interiors which you can go and visit for various events, including corporate events and stuff like that as well. Now, as you can see, blue skies, wonderful today. So what I'm going to do is shortly pass over to Joe and let him tell you a few bits and pieces about some of the ghosts who are connected with here also. But before we do that, if we take a little swivel round, I'll take us over here. You can see people throwing frisbees and stuff around the grounds just now. We have got this magnificent driveway, and on either side there are statues welcoming you here to Glamis Castle. On the left hand side we've got a statue of Charles I, and on the right hand side is a statue of James VI. Now, there is a very unusual landform here called a ha-ha, and on either side of the drive there is a sunken area of ground. Now, a ha-ha was for cattle, maybe for picturesque Highland cattle, to show off to your visitors, and these cattle would not be able to get out of the field bounded by the ha-ha. It's illusionistic because it looks as if it's flat, and the cattle could actually just walk right up beside you, but not.
But it's also very dangerous for very unwary tourists as well. Because many a tourist has fallen over the ha-ha, and that's why they call it a ha-ha.
Absolutely. Another royal connection I'd like to tell you about is that Princess Margaret, the sister, late departed sister of our present Queen Elizabeth, she was born here at Glamis, so it's seen a lot of events and history in its time also. And the castle itself is in a sort of baronial style. I often think it's very much like a Sleeping Beauty's castle.
Very Disneyland.
Disneyland.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe some of these attractions are actually modelled on Glamis Castle. So Glamis Castle in Angus.
But in the castle here, there's a couple of stories. The one I like is called the Bearded Earl. The Bearded Earl. He's got a big beard on him. And so the Earl was a gambler. He loved gambling. And on Saturday night, he had invited some of his friends over and he was gambling, but he was losing and losing and losing. And it came to midnight and it comes to the Sabbath. Now remember, they were in the heart of Presbyterian Scotland. You were not allowed to play cards on the Sabbath. But he insisted on playing cards. None of his friends would play cards with him until a hooded character turned up. And this hooded character turned up in the castle just after midnight. And he started to play gamble, and they were gambling and gambling and gambling. And of course, who was this hooded character? The devil. So the Earl was playing cards with the devil. And of course, he was losing and losing. And as his punishment, he's forever destined to end up playing cards in hell with the devil. The other story that goes in here, that there was a member of the family that the lions didn't really want to expose to the public, so they kept this member of the family locked in. Now, it could have been for physical disformities or mental disformities. Something happened with this, and that's not unusual in the royal family. So the story was that they actually locked this individual in one of the rooms, and they invited a lot of people up here, and somebody had the ruse that we're going to hang a towel from every single window that they could find inside this castle. So there was this hidden room that people had forgotten about. So they came up here, they hung a white towel from every single window. You can look at all the windows up here. And then they were able to deduce which room did not have a white towel. And so they went to find the door for the room that didn't have a white towel hanging for it, and they couldn't find the door. So there is supposed to be still a room in here that there is no door to, but the window is still there. Now, I love bringing people here because the tours inside here are great. Normally they've got a whole big herd of Highland cattle. If you haven't seen our Highland cattle, they're gorgeous. They're big woolly, they look like big yaks. But normally have them here, but unfortunately not today. But we've got a great day for bringing you such an impromptu, live little tour outside of Glamis Castle here up in lovely Angus, which is on the east coast of Scotland, and of course the home of the Aberdeen Angus as well. So another one of our breeds of famous cows that come from Scotland.
I'd like to say something about the landscape around the castle also, Joe, because people wouldn't expect such a refined, sophisticated landscape often, especially since this has got such an ancient history. They would expect a more rugged surroundings, but this is all to do with improvements and alterations, and they had a great respect for the gardener capability, Brown. And sometimes when you stray away from the castle, you could feel you were near some English Palladian mansion. The grounds are very wonderfully laid out, aren't they?
Very well manicured.
Yeah.
And they've got a lovely Italian garden here that you can go and visit. And just the grounds in general are just lovely. And the trees here, the ancient trees, there's some beautiful old trees here. And again, if you're coming up, you want to visit a royal castle, which is still used, still lived in by members of the aristocracy, then come up to Glamis Castle. We're not very far from another castle called Scone Palace, which is not very far from here. So when I'm doing tours, I'll usually do a 2-palace tour. So I bring them here to Glamis, and then I take people over to Scone as well. Both of them are still inhabited and still have the families living here, but they're open to the public. You've got to keep these estates going one way or another, so they keep them open. Nice cafes here as well.
We must talk about the Macbeth connection, because I know you probably have the same, Joe, where you have people who are Shakespeare fans and they want to hear a bit more about the Macbeth connection. But of course it's going back to an event in the 11th century which didn't actually occur, like the murder of King Duncan by Macbeth, which figures very strongly in the Shakespearean story. And they've got what they call Duncan's Hall here in the castle, which is a really old bit of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know, a lot of people do come here looking for the Macbeth story, but remember, in the 16th century, when William Shakespeare was writing about Macbeth, he was trying to ingratiate himself to King James VI of Scotland. So he played fast and loose, not only with the geography of Scotland, but also with the history of Scotland as well. So whether there's any veracity behind Macbeth ever being here, I would file that under maybe. I would open up that drawer and go, you know, I always say when you come to Scotland, you get the truths, the half-truths, and anything but the truth. I would put that maybe into veering towards anything but the truth, as Shakespeare was written as entertainment, not as a historical journal in that regard as well.
I think also from the Outlander point of view, we've got a connection with the Jacobites in that King James, or the uncrowned King James VIII, often called the Old Pretender, had kind of lost a battle, or it was a battle that was neither won nor lost at Sheriff Muir in 1715, and he stayed here and he left his fob watch under the pillow in the room that he'd actually stayed in, and one of the maid servants stole the watch, and generations later the descendant of that maid said, here is the watch that was left here. No. So there's a connection with he was the father of Bonnie Prince Charlie. Yeah.
Well, guilt goes a long way in Scottish history as well. that's Presbyterianism for you. You carry the guilt.
Yeah.
So I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, it's just a little impromptu afternoon. We're up here. We thought we'd take the opportunity to, while we're here,